The topic that I'm bringing today is a little different than probably a lot of the topics that you talk about in this forum, because it's a little more of the human being side of things. And my background actually is in engineering. When maybe not the most human being oriented role or background, but I'll tell you just a little bit about kind of my last number of years and kind of how I got to where I am now, and hopefully share a few things with you about just some things I think about leadership and self-leadership that hopefully will be useful for you and your organizations. My background in engineering actually is in consulting as a water wastewater engineer, and I was one of the owners of an engineering and environmental consulting company for quite a few years. I was actually with that company for more than 20 years. And I left there last year after quite a bit of soul searching about what I wanted to do with my life and my future, and how my transition of understanding myself and what was important to me happened over the last number of years. And so the work that I do now, I do some engineering still actually, but the work that I do now that is in that other realm of the human being side of things is really more around the mindset of leadership and of entrepreneurship and of taking care of ourselves as entrepreneurs and as human beings, which I think is what Eric was referring to, that it's super relevant right now because we're in a really unusual and very stressful time. And if we thought we had stress last year this time, I think we've discovered that that we actually can have even a little bit more stress loaded onto ourselves. And so just really bringing some tools and some awareness to some of those things that can really affect how we show up in business and in life. And that's really that's the piece that I focus on in the work that I do with my clients now. So I would love for this to be interactive. I know they said, like a 5 to 15 minute, and there's a little bit of time for discussion and questions. I'm happy to have conversation at any point here. And I just brought kind of an assortment of thoughts and topics to share. And if anything really resonates, I'd love to hear that. If anything sounds like completely ridiculous bullshit, I would love to hear that too, and have a conversation about that, and take what works for you, and and let go of the rest, I guess, would be my suggestion. So as I mentioned, one of the things that I really enjoy working on with people is what we called in the title leadership of self. Because I think that as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as leaders in our community, we're all leaders in a number of different ways. As leaders in our families, we're leaders in many different ways, and understanding how we show up and how we interact, and what's our best ways of interacting with people and with connecting with people in a way that we're moving forward the things that we need to move forward, and also leaving everybody around us feeling like they've been taken care of is incredibly important. And I can tell you from the standpoint of my history as a leader and as an owner of a business, I don't feel like I did a particularly good job of that in the first number of years. And it was really some of my exploration of what do I need to do to be a better leader and to show up as a leader for people in a way that that really takes care of me and also takes care of the people around me. And so that's really kind of my focus is taking care of the human being so you can take care of business. And that's I learned by testing on myself. And what I mean by self-leadership is really knowing ourselves, knowing what gets in our way, how we get in our own way in many ways, what our strengths are and are not, and how to work with those strengths in a way that we're bringing out our best without some of the downsides that come with strengths. And I'll mention what I mean by that in just a minute. And then also building in some pause into the way that we come at the world, so that we have some space between what happens and how we respond, so that we're not just in reaction mode. And so a lot of the work that I do is around mindfulness, which is a pretty, I think, popular topic these days. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with practicing certain, approaches to mindfulness, but there's a lot to offer there. And so that's just, I'll touch on a couple of things. So what I mean by strengths, I think I'll start there, because to me, that's one of the biggest pieces of building a team, and knowing where what you bring to an organization is, your best use, and where it's not. And, recognizing that there's a balance and pros and cons to every strength. And so knowing those things about yourself and knowing those things and understanding, what each of your team members, if you do have, multiple people in your organization, what they bring and really what lights them up in terms of the work that they do, can be incredibly important for long-term building a very successful and sustainable team. And, in terms of understanding strengths and how strengths can become our weaknesses, I would love to hear if anybody else has examples of this, but I'll share just one of them from my experience. And then maybe I'll open up the floor before I do anything else, if that's okay, Eric and Anita. And I don't know how you usually run these things, but
absolutely, go for it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, my example of a strength of mine that also can show up as a weakness is that I have lots of ideas, and I'm always seeing the ways that something can be improved, which is a really helpful characteristic as a business owner. And that can be viewed as, by other people as not being happy with the way things are in a business. And so, my envisioning of like, oh, that we could do this and we can improve that, to somebody might sound like the way things are is not okay. And a lot of that has to do with how I communicate and learning how to communicate those things that are important to me in a way that's that other people can be receptive to. But that was a big learning experience for me in my growth in leadership, was to recognize that, what I got excited about and what I saw as ideas and possibilities to other people, if I, depending on how I presented myself, could actually look like dissatisfaction and could look like not really buying into what the organization was doing. And that kind of thing can be very humbling, to recognize that that's something that is really innate to you and feels like, who you are and what you're all about can show up very differently to somebody else. So I throw that out there as an example, and, just a, maybe something to think about from the standpoint of, how you show up and how you interact, and then recognizing that sometimes those things that are our most, our strongest characteristics sometimes can be a little bit of a downside as well. And so just understanding that about yourself.
Can I see you?
Yes.
So.
Kara, I have a question, because I'm a GTLer, so I think we talked about that. And we use StrengthsFinder as the basis for that. Is that something you would recommend? Is that, is there other tools? Can you maybe?
I like StrengthsFinders as a really simple approach to looking at, kind of what are your natural characteristics and how do you show up. And actually the concept of balconies and basements around strengths comes from StrengthsFinders. So yes, I absolutely like to see assessments and that kind of thing done for teams, because I think it does help teams to understand maybe more about each other, and especially to recognize that something that makes complete and utter sense to you in terms of your approach or the way that you see things, to understand that somebody else looks at things in a very different way can be like, it sounds super obvious, but it sometimes can be really eye-opening when you see each other's assessments and strengths. And there's another one called PI, and I can't remember at the moment what that stands for. But it's another set of indexes that you can do that I think is pretty interesting. There are some that are a little bit more personal development oriented. There's a type of assessment or a type of system called the Enneagram that I also like. That one is a little bit more of a personal kind of what shows up for you in your you know, in terms of kind of those deeper challenges that you have as a human being. So that one can be really interesting, and I do work with that, you know, when I work with one-on-one clients, because that kind of awareness can be incredibly valuable, especially as a leader. So yeah, thank you for asking that. And GTL is Greater Tucson Leadership, so plug for that. It's a great program. You're about a 10-month program that both Anita and I have gone through, and really good for just getting you deep into the Tucson system and kind of all of the different interconnecting components that exist, you know, government and education and the economic development and kind of all of those topics, arts and culture. I mean, it's very multifaceted. And we did Strengths Finders as a part of that. So that's a part of that, the leadership component of that program. So
if you want, I can share one of my strengths is learner, which I thought, you know, that's kind of a crummy strength because I'm like, okay, great. And the good thing is I always do want to learn, and I value learning. The downside is, and I always also look always to improve myself. So I want feedback in order to learn. So the downside is, I think everybody does that and everybody wants that, but people don't want to really hear sometimes from me what I think they can improve upon, and they view it as really harsh criticism. So I'm still learning to deliver the message a little bit better, because, you know, the way I like to hear it is very different than a lot of other people like to hear it.
Yeah, that's super important when it comes to leadership, to recognize that the way that we experience something is not at all the way that somebody else experiences or wants to experience something. And so that was how I ended up starting in coaching, was that I went and did a year-long coach training program because I felt like I didn't understand the people that worked for me. And I wanted to understand people better, just in general. I felt like, you know, I'm an engineer. I was very task oriented. I was very head down. I was very transactional. And that is a characteristic maybe of technical people that, you know, that's you know, you can't say that across the board, but you know, it tends to be kind of true for technical people, that maybe the human being side is a little bit less developed. And so I wanted to develop that side, and that was mind-blowing for me to go through that kind of education and recognize things about myself. And that's really where I got on the path of kind of self-leadership, and that's been incredibly helpful for me to know myself better, because it's completely changed how I show up in the workplace and in the world, and in my, you know, personal relationships as well. So just plug for doing the kind of the personal development work. It is really a part of leadership as well, in my opinion. And the more you know yourself, the more you can really be successful at what you're doing in business, because you understand how to interact well with other people, and how to look at things from their standpoint and understand what they're needing, which I know, you know, in terms of kind of the I-Core and all of the programs that you all go through, understanding your customers and their needs is definitely right up there. And understanding them as human beings adds an extra layer of nuance to that I think is incredibly valuable. So yeah, if anybody else wants to comment, otherwise I'll throw another couple thoughts out there. So I will switch.
We're all engineers and scientists, Cara. So
they're like, what is this? So what are we talking about?
Just saying.
I was there. I was absolutely there. So one of the other things that Eric hit on, that I will just throw a few thoughts out there, is talking about really just capacity and resilience and taking care of ourselves right now. you know, we live in a very fast-paced world, and especially in entrepreneurship, it's an incredibly fast-paced and demanding way to, well, I got a question here. I'll finish my thought and then I'll read that question. It's just a challenging lifestyle and a challenging business to be part of, because it is fast moving, because it does require a lot of ability to move quickly, to change, you know, to respond. And so one of the tools that I think is incredibly helpful in navigating those kinds of environments, and then, you know, especially nowadays we're throwing work from home and school from home, and worries about you know, what's going on with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's just so much input right now that's really challenging for our systems to just to take in and to deal with that much intensity of change and new information and stress. And so so I highly recommend and work with my, you know, my clients, and the presentations that I do are often providing mindfulness tools and kind of ways of giving ourselves just a little bit of a nervous system break, because our nervous systems are pretty much on high alert all the time, and we don't even recognize it because it's so chronic, and it's just so insidious that that we think that this is just how things are. And I can tell you from my experience that building some of these practices into your life and into your day really does help you to also, you know, to kind of manage some stress. And, you know, it's not about productivity, but to, you know, to be productive in a different way, but also to have that ability to kind of step outside of the moment that you're in, and like zoom out a few layers and be able to look at things in a more, look at things from a different level or a different perspective, which can be incredibly helpful when we get in something that's really got us wrapped up, and, you know, we're having some sort of response that may or may not be considered emotional, but really is kind of tied to our more human being self. That just having that baseline of having done regular meditation or other mindfulness practices can be very helpful for allowing us to just have that pause and have that space between something that happens and how we respond. And you know, that can really shift things for us in terms of just our ability to take in and be with everything that's going on, and to you know, to manage in times when it's really, really stressful. So I would love to offer a little bit of a practice, but I'm only going to do it if people are game for it. But it's just something that you can do in just a few minutes as a way of kind of resetting your nervous system a little bit, and, you know, giving yourself a moment of just respite from the input and the output that we live in. And I think it's really helpful for resilience and, you know, just our mindset in general. So I'd love to do that if people are game. And while I pause and let you consider that, I'm going to look at the question. So when you start out, so the first question Solomon asked, when you start out in your relationship with a new partner, employee, or client, how do you advise developing an initial understanding of what their needs are? So I'm going to give a simple answer, and then we can talk a little bit more about maybe more of that. But the simple answer is, it's all about them and asking them that question. And so taking the time to actually have conversations and really just, you know, not go into it with, I have a solution, but go into it with, what is the problem that this person has? Because your solution may or may not actually match up with what they, you know, what they need, and you won't know until you really delve into that. And you know, so I know that's all part of kind of the customer discovery processes that you go through, but sitting down and having that conversation and really just making it about the other person and about, you know, how they're doing and what their pain points are, as simple as that sounds. So hopefully that helps, and that was answering the question that you were asking. So, and then Dr. Dave asks, how do you practice the moment of now? That's great. And some people are in for the exercise. So let's just do that. And I think, hopefully this will give you a little bit of a flavor of practicing, being here now. So, and aside, another super fast mini reset and way of taking care of yourself is really to just actually practice breathing deeply, because a lot of times we don't even breathe all the way into the fullness of our lungs, because we have tightness, and we have just kind of the armoring around breath that keeps us from being able to take a deep breath. And so if we're actually more purposeful about trying to breathe all the way down into our bellies, that can make a huge difference, just across the board when you're feeling stressed or something's really intense, to just remember that you are, need to actually breathe in, and recognize that a lot of times we're breathing from about the chest up, and we're not really breathing into the full lungs, or, kind of down into the belly, letting things really in. So I before I do something like these talks, to actually do some sighing, because that's a great way of letting the nervous system kind of chill a little bit, and just it's a deep breath, and and just letting it out with that kind of audible just and I know you all are muted, so feel free to try that right now, and just take a few breaths and just let them out with a nice loud sigh.
I'm going to do it. I don't see many other unmutes. All right, well, here we go.
And the reason that that is helpful is that is telling your nervous system that it's actually giving your nervous system a message to bring things down a few notches. There's our parasympathetic nervous system is kind of what's called the rest and digest nervous system. And most of the time we're kind of up in the fight or flight nervous system, where we're responding to emails and taking phone calls, and things are happening, and our systems are just responding constantly to input. And so even just giving ourselves a few breaths to bring things down a little bit can be incredibly helpful. And then the other practice is just a quick kind of repowering or centering tool, which is, let's start by, if your feet are on the ground or your feet are on your seat, feel your feet and just kind of feel in and notice that you have feet. And if they're on the ground, push them into the ground a little bit so you can feel the feedback of the response of that pressure. And instead of thinking about me talking about this and going, oh, okay, this is interesting and weird, just settle in and actually see what the sensations in your feet feel like. Give yourself a breath or two there. And then notice your seat in the chair, maybe the seat back supporting you, and really just feel settling into that support. Take a couple of moments to feel your breath moving in and out of your chest. In and out of your nose or your mouth. Feel the muscles in your face. Notice if you've got tension, if you're clenching your jaw, or if you've got tension around your eyes. Just try to let a little bit of that tension go. Let things soften a bit. And then just take a quick moment to get in touch with your 5 senses. So start by looking around your environment, see something, and actually like notice it, take a look at it, see what you're looking at. You know, touch your fingertips together or touch some fabric and feel the sensation of that, of touch. Listen to the sounds that you hear in your environment. If you've got anything to smell or taste, that's, you know, you can kick those in as well. And then just really come back here and back to the moment, back to the talk. And that was, I don't know, maybe 2-3 minutes, but that's something that you can do. That kind of recentering or repower can be really helpful throughout your day, in the middle of the day. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that. And you know, that just kicking into that kind of a few moments to reset and center, and doing that a few times a day. I actually set an alarm on my phone every so often just to go off at a random time to remind me. My husband loves this, to remind me to be mindful. But that can be just very helpful for just a baseline, like, way to manage stress levels and kind of take things down a notch. And, you know, the whole point of mindfulness is really to create that space around us so that, you know, we're not in reaction mode. We can notice when we're reaching our capacity, or, you know, things are getting in some way intense, and we, you know, we have the ability to then step back and take, you know, take a different perspective on things. And so that's really the value of that kind of practice. So hopefully that's something that will serve you well. And we had another quick question. So I'd love to get feedback on that. There's another question: when you start building the team, how do we make sure the new members align with our vision and be on the same page as the founders? That's an incredibly important conversation. And I feel like a lot of times organizations think that that's something that is going to be absorbed by people as they start with the organization. And I think that's not a great assumption. So I think that's worth, especially when it's a small organization, that's worth, you know, a conversation, a meeting, a working session, you know, some sort of actual, like, a purposeful communication, and really sharing the founder's vision, and, you know, why did you start the company, and, you know, and culture, organizational culture is a whole nother great topic that I think is one of the other ones on the roadmap. And I feel like that's something that you just really have to be purposeful about. And that's, you know, that could be hard when you're doing a zillion things and you just want to get somebody up and running and helping your organization. But taking the space and the time to, you know, especially early on when you're bringing on the first very critical new people into the organization, having some of those conversations, and, you know, and maybe even if you haven't developed some of those, you know, vision-y kinds of written documents that organizations like to have, to work through those as a group can be an incredibly helpful practice or kind of exercise to do. And keeping in mind also that those things are always evolving and changing, and so that's not a one and done. And, you know, we now have figured it out. Organizations change, and they change as the different people come in, and so it's good to revisit that stuff from time to time. So, and Dr. Dave has got a very desk and ergo mat to help him practice mindfulness. I love it. Sitting is the new smoking. Yeah. So. I really find, you know, that mindfulness is definitely a very vogue thing, but there's also a reason for that. And it's, you know, very helpful to build into your time and space. And yeah, so, you know, just leadership topics in general are kind of a fun thing for me to talk about. You know, another one that's huge that we probably don't have a lot of time to talk about, but is really big, is, you know, talking about like delegation. And as a leader, you know, how do you let go of things and let other people, you know, provide those tasks or support you in your business. And that's probably a whole talk in itself. But I can tell you that there's probably 3 standard common kinds of messages, which is I'll do it myself because I know how to do it and I'll do it well. Or, you know, it's my responsibility and, you know, I need to get this thing done. Or other people are busy and I don't want to overload them. And so I will just take it on myself. And all of those things are messages that we tell ourselves that are probably not true. And it's really good to catch on to them because that's part of our growth as leaders, is to learn how to intercept those messages and learn when to, you know, when to let go and when to just say, you know what, that's not actually going to be true for me anymore. And, you know, I'm going to need to turn this stuff over and train somebody else and, you know, bring in the help that I need in the organization and, you know, have that support. So that's another leadership topic that I bring as just a thought to, you know, kind of consider as you're building your teams. So.